Hello, International Relations classes. Hope you're having a good week in this most interesting of times. I'm going to continue today with Chapter 7 in the BOVA text. We're looking at economic globalization. And again, this should help you for some of your discussion posts that you're going to have to be doing that are due this Sunday at midnight. So if you have the slides there in front of you, if you look at slide number 2 of China from 1989, and then you look at slide number 3, and I believe that was taken in 2015, you can see the difference with China, and in particular this is Shanghai, in some 30 years of distancing, and you can see the effects of globalization, how China has really sought to get involved in the global international trade forum, and how much it has benefited. It's been really quite remarkable. If you look at the slide on, actually slide number 6, you can see two different views of globalization. Again, if you think of globalization, it is simply the interconnectedness of the world via trade, via communications, and the fact that everyone can be everywhere at every time, at any time, simultaneously, because of this. And of course, there's global trading and all kinds of things like that. But if you look at the two different quotes, they reflect two different views. Thomas Friedman, who was very much a globalist in 1999, said, "I didn't start globalization. I can't stop it, except at a huge cost to human development, and I'm not going to waste time trying." And in other words, his argument is, and of course many have this, globalization is inevitable. And the fact that you really can't stop it. Now, what's interesting is the modern world has become basically globalized. And you're talking the Western world like the United States, or if you're talking Europe, you're talking sectors of obviously China and Japan and India. But then if you look at the global South, not so much, or at least they're a little bit behind. And so not all of the world is globalized, but again, the major players typically are. And Friedman tends to argue it's inevitable, why fight it? You may as well just enjoy the process. You contrast that with David Reef in 2006. Today's globalization is most likely to be far more controversial and far less orderly. In other words, the argument for the globalists, the pro-globalists, is, for the example of international trade, it brings down the costs of goods for all of us. It's a good thing. Again, think of most of your shirts, your pants, shoes, whatever you have in your closets. I dare say that most of it, or a good portion of it, was produced offshore. In other words, if all that you had to buy was American products, in particular clothes, but pick your product, and that's all you could purchase, most likely it would be a lot more expensive, and we would not have as much as we do have. So again, Friedman thinks it's a good thing. Reef thinks it's a negative thing, that it can be very controversial. Now, you take the coronavirus that we're all dealing with right now, and quite frankly, that's a product of globalization. You had an outbreak in China, and because of global trade and global travel, you've got people getting in various, airplanes traveling from China to China, back and forth, and suddenly now it's in other areas of the world. And then, of course, you've got the interconnectedness of all kinds of other people in all these countries, particularly think of an international airport and a hub, and you can see where globalization could be a problem. Not that there weren't plagues before. You had the Black Plague in the 1400s, and you also had a massive influenza outbreak that killed tens of millions of people, from what I understand, in 1918. But this is a lot more exacerbated, again, because of globalization. And then it's further exacerbated because we've got instantaneous communication with the internet and social media. So something that perhaps may be grave but not as grave suddenly gets amped up by all of the instantaneous communication. So again, globalization, you can go both ways with it. If you move forward to the next slide in slide number 7 rather, talking about the difference between high politics and low politics. High politics deals with the competition between states and geopolitical influence. Again, you're talking about a lot of realistic power politics. You're dealing with wars, coercive diplomacy, things of that nature. All of that's high politics. Low politics deals with interactions among states and non-state actors with regards to global economic, environmental, and demographic issues. So in other words, if you're looking at low politics, globalization is much more positive, because the argument again is, if every nation produces what it can produce in the most efficient means possible, that means that we have access to goods and services across the globe at a much more economical price than we ever would if again, if we were buying solely in America. So you look at the different paradigms and how they view realism. If you look at slide number 9, rather, realists see the global economy as a zero-sum game. So what a zero-sum game means is I win, so you lose. So in other words, if I buy a product from you at a particular price, I'm going to win, I'm going to gain financially, and because of that trade, you're going to lose in some way, shape or form. And so they generally look at, again, you take trade before the United Nations, where different countries were trying to compete with other countries. Not that there's not competition today, but before the World Trade Organization and a lot of these tariff wars, there were tariff wars. One country's gain could be another country's loss. In other words, you could have a trade surplus where the United States is importing more goods than it's exporting, or another country is importing more goods than another country is exporting. In other words, this idea that it's winning or it's losing, but you can't have both. So in other words, a zero-sum game does not recognize that, hey, if we buy product from China, we're going to gain cheap products, they're going to gain the financial benefits, and everybody wins. A realist would look at that as, no, America's either winning or losing when they trade with China. It's never win-win. And so this is the idea of neo-mercantilism. And what that is the focus on the accumulation of national wealth via a trade surplus. Again, if you are exporting more goods than you're importing, the idea is that you're making more money and you're becoming more profitable. If you import more goods than you export, that is a negative, because again, you're reliant on other countries. You can't produce product yourself. A great example of that would be America's increasing energy independence, in particular under the Trump administration. And again, this was going on long before the Trump administration, with all of the fracking technology that they have. Now we're becoming more of an exporting nation when it comes to oil and gas, as opposed to solely reliant upon importing product from the Middle East. And so because of that's an idea of neo-mercantilism, where one nation is winning and another is losing. And again, we'll expand on that when we get into the section in this chapter on trade. If you look at the slide or slide number 10, they talk about something called protectionism. In other words, if you think of international trade as a zero-sum game, what you're very interested in is protecting your own country's goods that they produce. And so the idea, if a country is engaged in protectionism, you're trying to insulate, the government's insulating domestic industries from foreign competition, and so you will issue a tariff. In other words, it's a cost or a charge to another good that's coming into our country. So if you want to protect the steel industry, in other words, Americans producing steel and then trying to export it on the global market, if you're engaged in a protectionist policy, you're going to, let's just say, steel coming in from, make it up, Germany. If the United States produces steel at a rate that it costs 10% more for American steel than German steel. If you're engaged in a protectionist policy, perhaps you'll engage in a 10% or maybe a 15% tariff on the import of German steel. So what that does is that evens the playing field. There's also something called non-tariff barriers, that if nations cannot engage in tariff wars, which again they've been prevented because of the World Trade Organization, they engage in a non-tariff barrier such as a quota coming in from another country. So in other words, I can't impose a tariff on German steel, but I can say only 10,000 tons of steel can be imported in a given month. So in other words, it limits the import of steel from Germany, and it makes German steel less competitive. Another example would be strict health and safety standards. In other words, you can't go toe-to-toe with another country's product in cost, but you can make their product more costly by putting some sort of a safety standard upon it. Another ways the governments can protect products is they issue what's called subsidies. And what subsidies are different grants of money to basically businesses to lower their cost of production. A great example of that would be farm subsidies that the federal government gives to farmers that basically, in other words, their product perhaps is more expensive. Their corn is perhaps more expensive than corn imported from South America. But if the government kicks in extra money to farmers, that causes them that if they can't compete on the open market, they've got some funds coming in. So again, all of this is an example of protectionism. You're trying to protect your own products over other countries. Again, that is generally a realist strategy. And so again, you can take a look at the next slide in chapter 11. There's one damaging aspect of protectionism, particularly if you engage in tariffs on imported goods. You can get involved in something called a beggar thy neighbor policy. And basically what that simply means is basically some form of government policy, again, a lot of this is tariffs, that evens the playing field, but then harms other countries' products coming in. So in order for the other country, let's say we've exacted a tariff on imported German steel. Germany sees that and go, fine, if you're going to exact a 10% tariff on German steel coming in, we're going to exact a 10% tariff on American computers or cell phones or something of that coming into Germany. So in other words, these countries start engaging in what they call tit for tat strategies where, okay, you're going to hurt me, well then I'm going to hurt you. And it becomes, again, a beggar thy neighbor policy. Where this became significant is this is exactly what happened in the 1930s as the Great Depression was affecting not just the United States, but countries in Europe. America engaged in protectionist policies. They initiated the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which basically sought to protect American goods as they were being hit by American companies as they were being hit by the Great Depression. Well, then what happened is Europeans exacted tariffs on American goods going into Europe. And so basically there was these huge trade wars where prices kept going up and up and up. And again, if you've got an economic depression, that is the last thing you want to do because you want to get trade going between countries. You don't want to kind of protect it to such a degree that basically it freezes trade. Again, part of the challenge of the Great Depression is the velocity of money slowed down. So money going through the American economy slowed down. And then, because again, you had 25% unemployment, so people weren't spending money. And then on top of that, you couldn't sell products overseas because other countries were exacting tariffs on us even as they were with them. And it became really, in reality, a big mess. So anyway, I'm going to stop with that and I'm going to resume with slide number 12, talking about liberalism in the next segment.